to have our virtual book club, which was kind of a video watching, and that the audio program on culture. And it should be an interesting meeting today. I personally really enjoyed our first book club, and I think it's a great format. I'm excited to continue with it. And so, yeah, so welcome Elke back and for being our fearless leader for the book club. And I will, yes, there we go. And I will turn it over to you. I think you said you did not have anything, pre-planned like that little image thing. So yeah, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, no fancy screen sharing or PowerPoints or.
That was super fun though, the screen sharing. I like that word thing.
Oh, super fun. And actually for work, I've been doing some videos for study abroad students using Powtoon. So I've been creating cartoon videos, which is super fun. So who knows?
Who knows?
You never know. One day.
Right.
Yeah. So just like a quick introduction. So the podcast For Whom the Cowbell Tolls, I really enjoy that podcast. I listen to it frequently. It's introduced some good reflections for me in my own life as I moved between different cultures. And then I've also used it with students a lot. Primarily in Senegal, I used it with students to talk about cultural appropriation versus appreciation. And then also assimilation. So kind of working through how we navigate culture, how we engage with cultures that are different than our own, and how we can do it while validating both our home culture and our host culture. Mm-hmm. And then Richard Blanco. So I attended the Forum on Education Abroad's annual conference recently, and he was the keynote. And I was really just taken by his poetry and his words and his experience as a gay Cuban-American boy and then man living in America, and what that meant for him and how he found his place here. And then seeing them all together, I think both with Richard Blanco's perspective and then Nancy Holton's perspective, they're people that take a very different approach to living in third cultures than maybe even I would take in my own life. Mm-hmm. So anyway, so I'm happy that y'all joined me, and I really enjoyed the book club without a book format. So I thought that was kind of fun. Yeah. And so I guess to start, I was curious, first of all, if there were any images that really stuck out to people from either Richard Blanco's work or from Nancy Holton's work, or turns of phrases that they really connected with and they're listening to it.
I have, and I'm just chuckling here. When Richard first came to the country and his dad mistakenly signed him up for figure skating lessons instead of hockey. I chuckled so hard at that. And, I think it really points to, it's not that you don't know the rules of the color, but you're trying to assimilate and you're trying to, acculturate and be a part of, and you make just these small little things. And yeah, I just got a smile on my face when
Or maybe his dad knew exactly what he was doing.
Oh, you think
hockey in Canada can be really brutal.
His poems were beautiful. The imagery he used from, our national songs and stuff that he talked about, visions in his mind when he was a little boy. And well, how old was he when he moved here? Because it seems like he had these visions in Cuba and then he came here. Did you get that?
I want to say elementary.
I think he was quite young. I listened to a different podcast also, the On Being pod. He was interviewed in On Being by Krista Tippett. Mm-hmm. Spoke at Chautauqua. And I listened to that as well. And he was, I believe, conceived in Cuba, born in Madrid. His parents left Cuba, went to Madrid. And he was named Ricardo after Richard Nixon.
Oh, funny.
And his name is Ricardo Jesus, and then he's got the Spanish surnames. Mm-hmm. So it was Ricardo for Richard Nixon, and Jesus because his mother prayed that if they survived all of this, she would give him Jesus as his name.
Mm.
That's great.
It was such a fun interview listening to him. But he came here, I think, before he was 2 even.
Oh, wow.
Quite young, quite
Mhm.
young
Mm.
to the United States.
Just beautiful imagery with his words, don't you think? Wow, beautiful.
Yeah.
One thing that really stood out to me with Blanco's, the third, was it the third? The What I Know of Country poem was the forgiveness. That somehow stuck out. I did not take too many notes, tried to keep it simple, but I thought, yes, as with any relationship, because that's how he pictured it, right? As a love relationship or something like that. I thought that was just really telling. Now the cowbell thing, that I am Dutch and I'm an immigrant. But does this lady even know that the Dutch are, at the top of dairy exports in the world? They set the rules. Vietnam wants to, the government wants to feed their population more dairy products, so the population, the Vietnamese people get taller. That's the philosophy.
Mhm.
Who's selling dairy to Vietnam? 90 million people. The Dutch. So sure enough, Nancy does not like all that stuff at all. Oh, that's interesting. It had nothing to do with the real topic, obviously, of welcoming communities and how to adjust, but just the story behind it, that was quite interesting.
Mhm.
But the xenophobia and then on the other hand, the pressure to conform as an immigrant, right? Or even as an exchange student, you want to fit in, and how much do you sacrifice? But in Nancy's case, I don't think it was the culture of her home country. It was just new beliefs that she had started to take on. And yes, there are obviously in most Western European countries, some populations who believe more this or more that, but it definitely isn't a stereotype, common belief to hate cowbells or something like that, or church bells for that matter, because that's a very common thing in the Netherlands as well. So it was just an interesting story, I thought. And maybe that's what we need. Just so I have to thank Elke for coming up with these poems and this particular podcast.
Mhm.
Just amazing.
Nancy's story was amazing. I was getting so irritated with her in the beginning. It was like, what are you doing? Why are you telling these people how to live? And you're just so irritating. I almost struggled with listening to that. And then I got such a kick out of the fact that she wore shoes at the end and, wanted to fit in. And it's almost like she was willing to give in when she felt accepted.
Mhm.
It was just interesting. It was, I didn't get far enough to compare it to the exchange year, but it's almost like that culture shock roller coaster when you're just fighting, you're comparing your home culture to the new culture. And it's like, they're doing everything wrong here. They should be doing this. They should be doing that. But like you just said, Olga, the things she was bringing for change weren't necessarily her ideas from back home, right? Do you think she was they were new ideas after she moved to Switzerland?
Oh, clearly. Yes. Yeah.
She was only 8 when she went to Switzerland.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And she grew up in Switzerland.
Well, very much so. So I could compare her to my daughter. Basically, she was 8 when she moved to the U.S. Just a very different story. But that's what it takes to really spark. Okay, so what really triggers what? And then those shoes at the end. Yes, percent.
Sparkly shoes.
Sparkly too. Yeah, not the leather Birkenstocks or something. So interesting. It's just great stuff to read and listen to.
Who else had thoughts about Nancy? I want to know other people's thoughts on her.
So one thing where you're talking about these ideas that she had and where they came from, to me, it actually spoke a lot about the like activism that often comes in adolescence, where you're super inspired to take action to improve your community, yourself, your society, and you don't understand why everybody's like, maybe not everybody's working with you on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I sometimes wonder if because of her place as a third culture kid, where she had been raised in Switzerland, she felt like she really was, in a way Swiss, and yet she's, she is Dutch and she doesn't have citizenship, that when she came to citizenship, I wonder if for her it was more of a formality. Like, I've always been here, but she didn't maybe like acknowledge that kind of in this like flurry of activism, she had maybe like upset some people who then when they were given the choice, they too were pushing back. And so it kind of in a way reminded me of like how oftentimes in young adulthood, there's like this push and pull, and you start to figure out where the boundaries are of your community. And I don't know if she had ever had like a super supportive community to kind of establish those boundaries with her. Or conversely, in her activism, I didn't often hear her talk about her working with other people on her activism. So I didn't hear her talking about like a letter writing campaign that she had with other people, including some Swiss people, about the cowbells or the church bells.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed like she was very just driven for herself. And so I wonder if in some way she had like connected with another activist inspired community around these animal rights issues, if maybe they would have had explained a little bit more about the Swiss lens on animal rights. And these are some things we're working on. Here's like a good way to channel that energy. And for me, it actually reminds me of my exchange year, where it took me a while to understand who I could ask questions of, or who I could like talk to about things that I had questions of. Because sometimes, I'd like go up and talk to somebody and and they'd be like, no, I don't want to talk to you about like the Holocaust. Like I don't want, I was in Austria, like I don't want to talk about this at the dinner table. Where I'd be like, oh, well, tell me about the like concentration camp outside of town, and not really understanding where the boundaries were.
I both of my parents are both naturalized Americans. And I remember I was in second grade when my parents were naturalized. And I remember my dad saying that it was so important to him to become an American citizen because he was politically interested, and he felt that until he became a citizen, he did not have the right to criticize, to evaluate, to be vocal about his views, because he wasn't a member of the society. And so he felt that they citizenship then gave him license. And of course, and he did it always tactfully. My father was a very tactful person, but he just held back of engaging in the public square about what was going on in society until he felt he had the right to do that. And of course, Nancy didn't share that view. I don't know. Olga, are you an American citizen now?
Since last September, yes. So.
Wow.
Yay. Yes.
How did you experience that? I mean,
well, it's pretty fresh. So ask me in 10 years. But interesting in the podcast, there was something said about how it is not the end goal, but it is more a step to further developing your ties or roots or whatever it may be. And I think that's true. I do have some similar senses your father had at that time, and then it started very soon after moving here, where there was a referendum in our community, and it was something that really pertained to me, my family, and my employees mostly, and that was a minority group in our community. So I thought it was very important, and I've always been very involved in community in the first place. So I thought, yes, I'm new in the community. I'm going to be involved, and I'm going to vote in this referendum. And I showed up, and the first question is, are you a registered voter? Oh, I just moved here, right? That was that was 15 years ago about. So. And I thought it was just really frustrating not to be able to be an active part of it. A lot of people choose not to be active in it, and that's fine, I suppose. In our country, you don't have to vote. In the country where my husband's from, you have to vote. It's not just a right, it is your duty.
What country is that, Olga?
Uruguay.
Uruguay. Huh.
Yep. It's your duty. You have to vote if you are a not only a citizen but also a resident in the country. You have to have both. But so that's interesting. But and then in my role developing active leaders, it was really silly that I couldn't vote in the first place. Now there are a lot of different ways to influence. So I didn't feel completely incapacitated, and there were even legislators who asked me if they could put up a yard sign in my front lawn and things like that, and just knowing the movers and shakers. There were very different ways to influence and exposing my participants to legislators and lobbyists and all those things, even though I don't lobby myself. That's not my job. But so there are different ways. And you can be an active leader in the cooperative system, which is, cooperative systems are very common in rural areas.
Yeah.
So my electricity, my phone, it's all cooperative systems. And for farmers, which I'm not anymore, but think of Land O'Lakes or CHS or those things in our state. So Minnesota is very, very good at that. So there are different ways to still have a voice in those systems. You don't have to be a citizen as long as you're a member, right?
Yeah, to have some involvement and influence, right?
Yeah, very much so. So I did not feel completely silenced or anything. But in my role with my job, I should not speak out about my personal political views anyway. So I won't do that now either. Unless we're having a glass of wine or something, I might say a few things, but I typically don't say much about it. And I don't think that's my role anyway. It's more to listen to others and try to somehow have people get into dialogue and build the bridges, which is quite good. But anyway, very different from your dad, and yet I completely understand, and I have felt the frustration of not being part of it. Yeah. So now I voted last fall.
I like what you just said about, asking questions and kind of being this observer to a certain point of view. And I think that's really true for the any exchange program, but that's short term. What I'm really kind of taken by is, this longer, like, okay, your longer, period of time in Senegal, and Olga, your long-term, life here, and how you can observe, you can be a kind of an interested party in culture or the country or whatever from afar, but at some point you stay there long enough and it starts to shift. Yeah.
In Senegal is interesting because, and this applies potentially in quite a few other African countries, but in Senegal, there was an assumption that if you were white, you were not Senegalese. And I never considered becoming Senegalese or seeking citizenship. But I knew some people who were born in Senegal and were raised in Senegal and then were my age. And if their parents were French, but yet they grew up in Senegal, they were born in Senegal, they had dual citizenship, where was their place? And I think that Senegal at least is like still very much working through that, because there were also some assumptions made of people, in particular French, who were in Senegal and what their place was in the country and with the colonial relationship. And so I think also, it's interesting because my assumption listening to Nancy's story was that it was a fairly racially, religiously, somewhat ethnically homogenous society. And so there are differences between the Netherlands and Switzerland, but maybe walking around town, she looked Swiss. And what that looks like for people, for example, in the US, if you don't look like how people assume Americans in your community look like, what does that mean? And what are your interactions with people?
My son Andy went to France on exchange, and he went through the K-12 French immersion program in Edina. And his big story was no one at his high school knew he wasn't a new grad.
Sorry.
I got no problem. No one knew he wasn't a trans. No one knew he wasn't French for 3 days. He was at high school and his exchange school for 3 days before anyone realized he was American. And when they did, they'd never had an exchange student there before and kind of freaked out. But I mean, it gets to this, there was no hiding, like Elke, you in Senegal, that you are just very visibly different. There's no hiding for me in Mexico, or for maybe Chrisanne and Stephanie in Brazil, that we're just, you're not a part of the dominant culture. You're not visibly a part. Whereas Sam, you're going to Italy, you look, I mean, you look like you look Italian. You could fit right in, you know what I mean? Yeah.
That a lot too.
Or Greg, you being in Sweden. I mean, someone with no, say more.
On the streets, I could be the Swedish equivalent of the N-word, svartskala. I was dark haired. I had curly hair. Back then, I had what we unfortunately call today a jufro, and so I had a big afro, but black hair. I stood way out. They had on my Swedish identification papers. They say what?
People thought you were Turkish.
Or Yugoslav.
It was during the heyday of the Turkish guest workers,
Exactly.
Oh, how about that?
So on my Swedish identification papers, they still say that I have an olive complexion, brown eyes, and black hair, none of which I've ever possessed. But because I was a foreigner and Catholic, they put all that down. I really physically, visually stood out.
Well, yeah, I invite you to share a photo of those years with us in a coming meeting.
I wish I had them. Oh, I wish I had them.
Oh, you have them. I know you do.
Well, no, there wasn't digital cameras back then,
Somebody has to have a photo album somewhere.
Must be a photo album.
Yes.
It'd
There's
be
a
fun. So one thing I was wondering about the Swiss story is so this lady moved consciously to a very rural, small town, right? And so that is different than moving to an urban area with a lot of diversity and just different population, right? So if you would reverse that idea, or if you would project that idea on, say, Senegal, would it be different? Would you be easier after acceptance? Would you be more of a community member or considered less different in a small community or a larger community, Elke? What do you think? How would that work in Senegal?
Yeah, actually, when she went to that river and she said for her it was like paradise. I kind of chuckled because so in Senegal, it's interesting. So, and Tanya, I don't know you, but hi, and jump in anytime if you
Hey,
want to
Tanya.
share.
Right.
And I love the mirror behind you, anything gold. So, but in Senegal, it was interesting because for somebody initially arriving, whether white, European, American, anywhere from the American, like wherever you're from, even in another African country, it's much easier to find sub communities within larger cities. Like Dakar is the capital. There's lots of different communities. There's no synagogue, but there's there's lots of different communities to join. And to find people like you that speak your language that can help you assimilate or find your place. But then for me, the longer I lived there, the more frustrated I became when people assumed that I didn't speak the language, that I didn't know the culture, that I was a traveler or a tourist rather than somebody who lived there. And so I found that in the rural communities, the initial arrival was definitely more like of a culture shock, more shocking. But like you landed harder, but your stay was softer, if that makes any sense. Like the longer you stay, people recognized you. When I lived for a year in a small town and they saw me as Salif and Hokaya's daughter, they're like, oh yeah, hey, I saw your dad last week, and we didn't look anything alike. Although it's funny, he has a round face. So like, oh yeah, you have your dad's face. But so they just automatically put that on me, which was wonderful. Now alternatively, so I lived near the mangroves, and there was a community of French people that had set up vacation homes there, and they didn't learn the language. They didn't respect cultural norms about dress. They were fairly loud. They would be openly intoxicated in a predominantly Muslim area. And so people actually hate it. Like if they got a choice to kick them out, they would have. So I, actually understood where the people in Nancy's community were coming from, because I think that if the people in my community could have said, hey, we don't want you here. But actually I think they would have taken me. So it's that interesting thing, which is that, so it's interesting because in Senegal as well, you're starting to get a lot more of there's a few yoga meditation retreats in really beautiful rural areas. Well, if you wear your, bikini into town with a see-through cover up, you're going to be you're not going to get any service. You're not going to get any help. People are going to talk about you behind your back. And while I really believe in freedom of expression, I also believe in respecting other people and accommodating the values that the local community has. So
I think that it is that juxtaposition about in Nancy's story, you have this community that was hostile to her, and it became very personal, right? It became because they knew her, and it became a very, very hostile personal attack on her. But it's been my experience that what people hope for in welcoming the outsider and welcoming the immigrant is someone who they sense wants to be there. We're in Senegal because we want to experience Senegal. We want to be part of the local community. In the courts, we see, if you saw a daily court calendar over which I presided, you would be astonished at the diversity and in the names and the languages of the people who appear in court. And it was nothing to have, it's nothing to have on any given individual court calendar to have a Russian interpreter, a Hmong interpreter, a Vietnamese interpreter, a Karen interpreter, and to have 4 or 5 different language interpreters, and always Spanish, always a Spanish language interpreter. And my court staff, the clerks, on certain days, at the end of the calendar, would look and say, I understand why this particular person or these folks, I understand why they want to be here. What I don't understand is why can they not obey the law? Why can they not obey our norms? And what do I do with this feeling? They struggled with it. The staff really struggled with this. We welcome the immigrant. But for goodness sakes, they wanted them to behave themselves, and they wanted them to behave themselves according to our laws. And that is a real struggle. And I think Nancy's small community went through that. Not that she was breaking the law, but she wasn't respecting the tradition, the time-honored traditions of bringing mice tail to get your bundle of mice tails. But I mean, the time-honored traditions in that local community, and it grates against people. I think we don't know what to do with it.
I just wanted to add that a lot of people assume that people move to other countries out of choice, but we have so many refugees that have no choice. And when they come to the United States or Germany, wherever it may be, people just assume, oh, well, they should adapt to our culture because we're kind enough to host them. And they often forget that people may not have wished to come to the United States. It was the only choice they had. So I think that we can't assume everyone is here because they chose to come.
Thanks for that, Tanya. Tanya, I'm John. I'm the eClub president, and I welcome you to the meeting. Would you do a quick introduction of yourself and where you went on exchange?
Yeah, I'm Tanya Novak, and I went to Germany. Went to Brazil in 1976-77 for a year as an exchange student. But then I lived in Germany for 4 years with my former husband, who was from Eastern Germany. So I've lived abroad about 6 years.
Where did you live in Germany?
I lived in a city called Halle an der Saale, which is very close to Leipzig. And I guess I speak also from that experience. When I was living in Halle, there were many, many Kurdish refugees living there. And people really condemned them, saying things like, well, why do they always go around in crowds, in small groups? You never see them alone. Well, it's because they were scared, because there was so much racism, violent racism in that part of Germany, that they were getting attacked. And they were not allowed to work, and they were only allowed to live in one particular housing project. The government assigned them to a certain place. And so they were basically cut off from contact with Germans. Yet the German people expect them to integrate. You can't do that when the government has a plan to keep you separate.
What year was this approximately?
This was the late 90s, 99 through 2003.
So not that long ago. Is it your sense that that has changed for that population at this point?
I don't think so. No, there was a very clear hierarchy when I lived there. No one ever told me what it was, but I could feel it. And I felt very much like a foreigner. Even though I was married to a German, I did not feel accepted at all.
Even in 4 years?
Yeah, in 4 years, I didn't feel, I mean, I had a couple of friends, but there you're condemned if you don't speak perfect German, if your grammar is bad. Yes. People will openly make fun of you. Store clerks will make fun of you. We would never dream of doing that in Minneapolis to make fun of someone's English in a store. You always give customer service, but no, it's very different there.
And was that a smaller, how big of a place was that?
It's about 100,000 people.
Oh, so large enough.
Yeah, large enough. Yeah.
Greg, go ahead.
John, I think it's important for us to remember there's a big, big difference between a refugee and an immigrant. And the immigrant wants to come to a country. I'll pick on Karin's parents. They wanted to come to America. They were eager to come to America. A refugee in Hannah from Kurdistan, I think, ended up in Germany. That person didn't want to be there. That person was really hoping there'd be peace declared where they came from and they could move back. It's a very, very different perspective. Immigrants often want to learn the language. Refugees often don't care to learn the language. So one has to look at that. Also,
good distinction. Thank you.
In many European places, in countries, Sweden example, and I think like Germany, the government has created these large housing projects, and this project is Kurdish, and this project is Syrian, and that project. Well, how do you expect those people to integrate if they live amongst people of their same culture, and they go to the grocery store, the same culture? And I'll pick on Stephanie and Chris Ann. If they bought only at the Greek grocery store, they wouldn't be integrated into the American society, and that that doesn't work. It's interesting to me, and I'll just be very quick. The largest Somali population outside of Somalia is in Minneapolis. The second largest is in Stockholm, and the Swedish government often sends delegations here to see are we successful? How are we so successful here in Minneapolis in integrating Somalis? And they've not been able to achieve that in Sweden. And we go, we're successful at integration? You got to be kidding me.
Right. Exactly.
But compared to what's going on in Sweden, we're light years ahead of them. So anyway, I do think, again, go back, it's a huge distinction between immigration and refugee.
Stephanie, were you going to say something?
Just comments earlier. I think just several people touched on it about respect. We're we go somewhere, we're kind of a guest, and Karin and Olga, you said you have both experiences about until you became a citizen or your loved one became a citizen, you kind of were a guest and were respectful and didn't maybe weren't so out there, as if compared to where you grew up potentially. And I think that's universal, just that respect for culture and the thing that really hit me with Nancy's story about how she just decided, I'm going to speak my mind, and I don't care, kind of like. And even to hear at the very end how she had the idea that this person's barn was too dark for his horses, and just kept that on for years and years and years, twice a week, still, poking her head in his business and bringing that up. That I think it would be difficult to have a neighbor like that.
Extremely difficult. But the good news was that she was at least growing in her emotional and cultural intelligence. I think it's, but I would not recommend anyone, no matter if it's a new culture or a new city, or even if you would go, say, to an entirely different part of your own city and become a member of some sort of an organization there, right? And you step into the room. We've all had these feelings. You step into the room, the Zoom call for the very first time. You're not going to be the first one to speak up and tell everybody how it's going to be done. That's not how you typically use your skills, but you'll first sit down and listen and test the waters a little bit, and then gradually become more comfortable, and at some point you might be comfortable enough to speak up. And I don't think that means that you give up your own identity, because that was her point, right? She would not give it up.
Mhm.
But those are two different things. Just being more a follower at first when you're doing a community, doing an organization, doing a Rotary Club. And then as you become more familiar, you can just be more open. And if it's, I do believe there's, and I'm curious about this, I think where's the limit, right? Because there are maybe examples where you really, really can't live with it. And what if it's a criminal act?
Mhm.
It's not a horse in the barn that you might consider a little bit dark, but it's something really seriously bad. Where's the limit, right? As a new person.
Chrisanne.
Olga, as you listened to the Nancy story, were you getting upset, or what? I mean, how were you reacting to that as a fellow country person?
I was not upset. No. But it was definitely very interesting. Well, there are animal rights activists, or any type of activist, the pipeline activists. Or activism is not just speaking up for a right. That it's a different thing. There's that will be law, but these are not people. So it's a different thing, and you'll find those in Switzerland too. And Elke said, why didn't she gather with those other activists, right? It seemed like it was just her against the rest of the world. And yeah, that's interesting. Of course, there are activists in the Netherlands too. Mm-hmm. But yeah, but no, it didn't upset me, but well, I hope she'll learn a few things through this, because it's very painful for her, and her community is really, really hurt by her comments and her actions. And she's not contributing to it. It's not going to elevate anything. It's just a battle. And she has 3 children. And sometimes I bite my tongue because I have children, right? I'm like, okay, it's not exactly how I wanted this, but my young children who are part of this community, I don't want this to be more difficult for them. So you're part of a big community, so how do you play that role? But for me, that limit would be very different than Nancy. But I wasn't upset. But and Tanya, and so I'm from the Netherlands, and so similar to Germany and Sweden, so the policies are like that, where refugees are placed in special housing, and they may not, where they cannot, are not allowed to work. And there are all good reasons for it, but it becomes very difficult for integration. And that was not the goal in the first place. It was just a temporary situation, but it becomes very difficult. And so I have always been super impressed with how that's been going in the US, even though, there's always room for improvement, but but much, much better here. It's nicer that we have a more recent culture, probably more based on immigration, and not those deeply rooted traditions. And as soon as you have a slight accent, well, you must be from that town, so that means you're
not from
whatever
here.
That may be. Not from here, right?
Not from here.
Yeah.
I really am taken with what you just said. I mean, I think the impression on immigration in the U.S. has been, I don't know, so negative from many sides over the past X number of years. To hear that it's actually much better than in many countries in the world is really rather stunning to me. So I appreciate that you shared that. We're down to about 3 or 4 minutes. Elke, I'm wondering if you could pose one of the questions, from your email, or anything that you'd like us to think of as we end the call today, and we'll do the Rotary 4-way test and then be on our way.
Yeah. So rather than a question, I have 2 kind of summarizing thoughts to share.
Please do.
And then, I mean, I really enjoy these types of conversations. And so if folks have other ideas for book clubs, they don't all have to come from me. So please share. And actually, I mean, even Third Culture Kids, that was great. Greg's suggestion and Chris Ann's colleague. So really appreciate it. My first one is that with Rotary being a service organization, it's just, I think one thing we can learn from Nancy's story is that we need to learn before we can serve. And so whether that's serving your community, whether that's whether that's like voting on an issue, whether that's participating in civic and, civic government, or if it's serving your own life and your like family, just, like your micro community, we need to learn first. And so ask questions, meet new people, open up a new book, read a different type of newspaper for a day. There's a lot of resources out there. And so just, seek questions. Like, I think that's really also the connection for me with the Rotary Youth Exchange for this topic today, is that I think an exchange year is actually all about learning. It's a year where I don't think I knew it at the time, but I truly was able to make many mistakes and people forgave me. And I think that's really powerful, especially for youth, but even in our old age. John can learn a lot on the pickleball court.
Right.
And then the second piece is Olga, you mentioned this at the beginning, and it was a quote that I really pulled out as well, which is forgiveness became my country. So let's forgive each other. Let's forgive ourselves. Let's forgive our country. I think we all have an ideal of the community that we want to be part of and the country we want to be part of. And ideals are just that. They're like sparkly, new, shiny, but they don't actually, they're not real. And so I think that's like, for me, like a huge takeaway is forgiveness became my country. And then I'd like to leave it with a quote from America the Beautiful Again by Richard Blanco. How I want to sing again, beautiful or not, just to be in harmony from sea to shining sea, with the only country I know enough to know how to sing for. And so sing for yourself, for your community, for your country, and hopefully someone can join you in your song.
Just wonderful. Thanks so much. Yeah, applause.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
joining.
Let me share the four-way test here. Tanya, Kirk, if you are there, if you can allow me to share. In most Rotary clubs, the four-way test is sort of done in the beginning, and in ours, we tend to do it towards the end so we can kind of go along in our day with these kind of four guiding principles fresh in our minds. So you can all take yourselves off of mute, and then we can say this together. The Rotary four-way test of the things we think, say, and do. Is it the truth?
Truth.
Is it fair to all
concerned?
Would it build goodwill and better friendships? Would it be beneficial to all concerned?
And I would just say that today's meeting really meets the four-way test. It just great meeting, another really enjoyable book club. And it's nice in this format to actually be talking with each other during the meeting. I don't know how you guys all feel, but I just enjoy the conversation and having ourselves off the mic and just sort of this free exchange of ideas. So, okay, thanks for your leadership and for leading us in number 2.
Thanks everybody for participating.
Yeah, and Tanya, thanks for joining.
I'm sorry I came late. I had a meeting right before, so
Okay.
I'm sorry I missed the story. I'd like to hear Nancy's story sometime.
Yep, those were in the email that Stephanie sent out or that I sent out, and they're links. There's 4 links. 3 of them are videos of Ricardo and of Richard, and then one is the Radio Lab 1 hour.
Okay.
That's like an hour, 50 minutes, something like
Thank you.
something like that. Yeah, you're welcome. And please join us again. The link is always the same, and the Wednesday is always the same. For our regular members, I am in a full day state training next week that ends at 5. So I'll miss, I'm going to try to end that meeting. I'm the presenter. So if someone would be willing to be the host of the meeting in the beginning, get us off, I can pass out the PowerPoint and everything. Would anyone volunteer or be willing to volunteer for that, to be the kind of lead for the meeting? Thank you. Thank you, Chrisanne or Greg. I will, you guys can duke it out, and I'll send over So thanks, everybody.
Surrender.
So easy.
Very good.
Thank
Have a great,
you. Thank you.
great evening. Kirk, if you would like to pass control, we can stop Facebook at your convenience.